The doe on the hill. The day Violet saw the doe standing on the ridge was the same day she buried her wife, Clara, under the old oak tree. It was a muggy, oppressive August afternoon, the air thick with the promise of rain. Clara had passed during a storm, the third one in a row, which had battered the farm with such ferocity it felt as if the sky itself was mourning. Violet had expected it, though. Clara had been wasting away for months, her strength sapped from a sickness that doctors couldn't quite name. The farm had fallen silent in those months, except for the sound of Clara's labored breathing and Violet's constant, quiet vigil by her side. When Clara was gone, Violet did what needed to be done. She laid her wife to rest under the ancient oak, the place where Clara had proposed to her many years ago. The tree had always been Clara's favorite spot, its massive roots twisting and tangling into the earth like something eternal. It had felt like the right place for Clara to return to. Violet packed the soil around the grave tightly, her calloused hands moving mechanically. Petunia, their old border collie, sat silently by her side, watching her with those sad, knowing eyes. Violet crouched down beside her, resting a hand on the dog's graying head. "It's just us now, Petunia," Violet whispered, her voice thick. She rubbed the dog's ear, taking comfort in the familiar motion. Petunia whined softly, her nose lifted slightly to catch the scent on the breeze. Then, without warning, the dog's ears pricked up, and she let out a low, rumbling growl. Violet tensed, following Petunia's gaze to the ridge that overlooked their farm. That's when she saw the doe. The deer stood perfectly still at the edge of the ridge, its eyes locked on Violet. There was nothing particularly strange about the doe itself. It was an ordinary creature, with soft brown fur and dark liquid eyes, but something about the way it stared at Violet made her feel exposed, like it saw right through her. It was unnerving the way it didn't blink, didn't twitch, just stood there, observing her with an intensity that didn't belong to an animal. Violet raised her hand instinctively, though she wasn't quite sure why. Maybe it was to show she meant no harm. Maybe it was something else entirely. The doe didn't react. It simply held her gaze for a long, long moment, and then, as if deciding something, turned and disappeared back into the woods. For the next few days, the deer returned. Every evening it would appear on the ridge, always standing in the same spot, always watching Violet from a distance. Petunia would growl at first, but eventually the dog stopped reacting. Violet didn't understand it, but there was something oddly comforting about the deer's presence. It made the farm feel less empty. One particularly hot afternoon, Violet was pulling weeds from the vegetable garden when she noticed the sky darkening. The air felt electric, and she could smell the coming rain. Petunia had already taken refuge under the porch, her fear of thunderstorms well established. Violet straightened up, glancing toward the ridge where the deer usually stood. This time, though, the deer wasn't there. Instead, standing in its place was a woman. Violet froze, her heart stuttering in her chest. The woman was tall and slender, with long flowing brown hair that cascaded down her back. She was dressed in a simple white gown that looked almost out of place against the wild landscape. And just like the doe, she was watching Violet. For a moment, Violet thought she might be seeing things. She blinked hard, expecting the woman to vanish, but she remained, as real as the ground beneath Violet's feet. Then, just as the first raindrops began to fall, the woman turned and walked back into the woods. Violet didn't know what compelled her, but she dropped the weeds she'd been holding and followed. The rain was coming down hard by the time Violet reached the edge of the forest, but she barely noticed. She moved quickly, her boots sinking into the mud, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. She didn't know where she was going, but something deep inside her urged her forward, pulling her toward the woman she had seen. Eventually, Violet stumbled into a small clearing. The rain seemed to stop as soon as she stepped into it, though she could hear it still pounding against the trees that surrounded her. And there, kneeling by the stream that cut through the clearing, was the woman. Close, she was even more beautiful. Her skin was pale and smooth, her hair wild and tangled from the rain, and her eyes were the same deep, knowing brown as the doe's. The woman looked up as Violet approached, and a soft smile spread across her face. "You found me," the woman said, her voice like the sound of the stream. "I was beginning to wonder if you ever would." Violet stared at her, her mind spinning with 1,000 questions. "Who are you?" she finally managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman stood slowly, her movements graceful and fluid. She stepped closer to Violet, her eyes never leaving hers. "I'm Rhea," she said simply. "I watch over this place." "I've been watching over you too." Violet shook her head, trying to make sense of it all. "Why? Why me?" Rhea's smile softened. "Because you needed me. I've seen your pain, Violet. I felt your grief. And I've come to help." In the weeks that followed, Rhea's presence became a constant in Violet's life. She appeared during the quiet moments, when Violet was tending the farm or sitting by Clara's grave. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories of loss and love, of life and death. And slowly, the hollow ache in Violet's chest began to ease. One evening, as the sun set over the hills, Violet found herself standing at the ridge with Rhea by her side. The wind whispered through the trees, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Violet felt at peace. "I think I'm ready," Violet said quietly, her voice steady. Rhea turned to her, a gentle smile on her lips. "Ready for what?" Violet looked out at the farm, the place she had called home for so many years, and then back at Rhea. "To let go." Rhea reached out, taking Violet's hand in hers. "You don't have to do it alone," she said softly. And as they stood there, hand in hand, watching the sun disappear beyond the horizon, Violet realized that she didn't have to. Not anymore.